Welcome and thank you. Just before we commence, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Yangwaba people of the Gold Coast and all their descendants, both past and present. We also acknowledge the many Aboriginal people from other regions, as well as Torres Strait and South Sea Islander people who now live in the local area and have made an important contribution to the community. In today's video presentation, I'm going to be centering my presentation on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which we're hoping to achieve by the year 2030. And this episode in particular will be deep diving into Sustainable Development Goal number 2, Zero Hunger. The Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. The 17 goals are all interconnected, so in order to actually leave no one behind, it's important that we achieve all these goals by 2030. Now, today's episode, we're going to be looking at SDG 2. Now, SDG 2 is the goal to have zero hunger by the year 2030. The official wording is to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. What would you say if I told you that solving the issue of world hunger doesn't come down to just having more food available? For the last 40 years, mainstream coverage of the issue of world hunger has often been solved with the solution that by providing more food, we can give food to the hungry, and as a result, there will be no more hunger. However, over this period as well, you can see that there's now a whole ecosystem of food charities available to us to make these donations to. And because these food charities are so persuasive, it makes many of us feel that we have done our part and the problem is solved. However, this is far from the truth. If you actually have a look at it, each year there's a larger gap growing between people who aren't hungry due to being able to provide for themselves compared to people who are. So we're actually getting worse, and if we continue on this path, we're not going to meet the 2030 goal. We're actually going to dramatically underperform. So why is this the case? If hunger isn't a matter of supplying more food, then what is it? Well, I'm glad you asked. It is estimated that 1 billion people worldwide suffered from starvation last year. This directly correlates to every 1 in 7 people. However, our planet produces enough food on its own to feed the entire population. So why should hunger like this even exist? Let's take 3 countries to highlight the problem. The first being Bolivia in Latin America, the second being the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the third being Ethiopia, both found on the African continent. These 3 countries have massive potential in terms of food and agricultural production, yet they are all struggling in terms of their current malnutrition. Bolivia, for example, is 30 times bigger than Belgium, a country found in the EU, with an equal population size. Currently, over a third of the country's land is used for farming and agriculture, with over 40% of the nation's employment falling in this industry. Yet Bolivia still has reported that 25% of the country is currently unable to provide food for themselves. This could be for many reasons, including the fact that Bolivia is currently one of the poorest countries in Latin America. When we have a look at the Congo has enough natural resources to feed the entire African continent. And currently, over 58% of employment in the Congo comes in the agricultural industry. However, the country is also worryingly currently reported that 70% of its population is currently undernourished. That's the highest per capita in the world. If we go slightly over on the African continent, we have the country of Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a population of 82 million, with close to 64 million farmers currently in the country, or the equivalent of 77% of the population working in the industry. Now, Ethiopia has currently one of the largest cattle herds in Africa, and with these cattle, they have enough to supply milk and meat to the entire east coast of Africa. However, we still find that 41% of the country is reportedly undernourished. Now, this paradox is really stark, isn't it? Why is it that countries that seem to have a high representation in agriculture are those most affected by hunger and malnutrition? If we look into that a little further, across the planet, close to 60% of the world's population who are currently experiencing malnutrition or the inability to provide food for their family have been shown to be workers or relatives of people coming from the farming, agricultural, or fishing backgrounds. If you take this in comparison to the 2 to 12% of Europeans that are farmers, and in the US where only 2% are farmers, these countries suffer from a largely different problem to that currently faced by these farmers, and that is obesity. If you look at the USA, for example, almost 1 in 3 people are obese, yet hunger still ravages people across the globe when there's such a surplus in these countries. How is this so? How did we ever get to this point? I mean, it would be pretty easy just to say that it's always been this way and we can never change it. And let's be honest, certain events such as war, natural disasters really don't help these third developing countries to maintain their food chains. Although it's not just these events that cause people to have an inability to provide food for themselves. In my opinion, it's mostly the policies that are causing this. Firstly, let's start with trade policies. When looking at trade policies, the policies bring about a reduction or even an absence of taxes and quotas at borders. And as a result, agricultural goods circulating increasingly freely between the markets of poorer countries and richer countries. And this is called trade liberalisation. Vast farm businesses from the north use tractors, mechanical equipment, and pretty, high-tech fertilizers, and they're often provided to them at affordable prices, with their government offering them subsidies for these and banks providing them finances. If we look at farms in the south, who are generally poorer and only often have their hands and basic tools to work with, they don't benefit from any subsidies, they don't have any sort of fertilization, and a lot of the time, even their access to land is questionable. Another good example is, let's have a look at just cows. If you take the example of the African cow, now based on what the African cow is fed, how it's maintained and where it lives, it's able to make around 1 to 5 litres per day. If you look at its compatriot in the EU, a European cow makes close to 25 to 30 litres per day. Now, I think that's part of the problem. If you think about it, to allow these farmers to compete with each other when one is far more advantaged than the other is almost the equivalent of just having a bike race against a Ferrari. The second policy I believe is affecting world hunger is the agricultural policies. In becoming self-sufficient and industrializing countries, agriculture has been developed through policies to enable countries to become self-sufficient and even produce surpluses. If you look at the USA, the budget allocated to the American agriculture, which accounts for 1 to 2% of the country's population, is around 95 billion US. Whereas in the EU, the Common Agricultural Policy is often the main source of revenue for a majority of their farmers. However, if you look at the 3 countries we looked at earlier, in Bolivia, Congo, and Ethiopia, the politicians and governments in these countries have invested little to nothing in these industries. And as a result, farmers receive hardly any support. And most of the time, what little aid is available is provided predominantly to industries with large export potential, such as coffee and wool. All these policies have made poor countries whose population is largely comprised of farmers, largely reliable on food imports from larger industries or emerging countries where prices of imported agricultural goods go up in international markets. Unfortunately, millions of poor farmers and consumers can't afford the higher prices and therefore don't have a sustainable way to feed themselves, as seen in the food crisis of 2008 and 2011. The last policy that I believe has an effect on ending world hunger is the policy around energy. Energy policies that promote biofuels produced from sugarcane and oil palm also contribute currently to the impoverishment and hunger faced by these farmers who should be farming for food as opposed to farming to meet the regulations of more advanced countries. What is the way forward? To end this paradox of hunger, farmers who account for half the world's population need to be encouraged and supported so they can feed themselves and their families. How can we help this to be achieved?